Good afternoon. Let's get started. And we're still waiting for one more person of our panel. We haven't seen him or her. Mr. Deputy Minister, it is. Welcome, please, over here. And let's get started. Good afternoon, dear participants of the conference. My name is Yulia. I am a senior fellow, senior specialist on social security at the World Bank's Ukrainian office, and I will chair this session. And it is to shift us towards the youth channel. And I understand the whole complexity. By the way, thank you, organizers, for the very good lunch. And I understand it's difficult to take the information after the good meal. And on the other hand, I see plenty of young people. Therefore, I hope that the issues at stake we're going to talk about will be within your direct interests, and hopefully it's going to make an impression on you, so you will eventually take part in the discussion, and we will try to go by the schedule in such a way that you have an opportunity to take part in the discussion. So the goal of this session is to talk about the practical results of the ACET project, close to the influence of unemployment and unstable employment, and how it influences their further life, your well-being, independence, and poverty for young people. The traditional unemployment level among youth is higher, and this pertains to both Europe, EU countries and Ukraine, because in 2016, for the age brackets 15 to 30 for 4 years, the unemployment level was 23%, 25 to 29, that was 12%. The unemployment level that was higher among the other age groups, age brackets. So the problem still persists, not only in our country, and the study really deals with a number of European countries, EU countries, so it tries to shed light on by how much these problems pertain to Ukraine and how the European experience might be usable to resolve those issues in our country. Now, just to jump ahead and just to say that the study results have confirmed that the negative impact of unemployment when someone is young will remain with you for the rest of your life. As the researchers say, that will be a scar that will stay with you until you die. And the question the hand says, how would you mitigate that status? And first of all, you should avoid unemployment. In the second place, you should minimize the time of staying unemployed. And number three, it's to support people better as long as they stay unemployed, just to provide them with psychological, not to aggravate their psychological depression. So this platform is used to talk about the results of this study, and we have guys from the Ministry of Education, we have guys from the Ministry of Youth and Sports, and soon a representative of the State Employment Service will come over here. That actually makes all the institutions making a contribution to the policy to provide young people with employment. We also have people from ILO, and we're going to talk to them about this study. I will introduce, for the beginning, our keynote speakers. First of all, Ms. Olena Nizalova will introduce the study results, and she's the head of the UK group, ACEPT group, and she works for the university here in Ukraine. Mariya Aleksynska, she represents the ILO, and she'll be followed by Minister of Youth and Sports, Aleksandr. Yarema, and we also have Deputy Minister of Education Volodymyr Kovtunets, and also Ihor Samokhin, who represents the Analytical Center. And as I have already said, hopefully we're going to have one more person joining us, named Serhiy Kravchenko, who is the Deputy Chair of the State Employment Service. I propose that we have 10 minutes for each presentation. And I suggest that we start with the presentation introduction of the study itself. Olena will be followed by Mariya, who will briefly share the information with us about non-standard extraordinary forms of employment for youth, and also the program to be promoted to tailoring the studies up to one's employment, a further job. And then we'll talk further things. Good afternoon. Thank you, Yoda, very much for the introduction and for the story about this panel. I'm very happy to present the results of our study. This is a project lasting 2 years already, and it's less than 1 year until it's ended, and we have practically conducted all our studies, and we're completing them, and now we want to bring them to the politicians, to the public, to non-state organizations, non-governmental organizations working with the youth, to actually enable them to rely on our findings when it comes to the formation of a new policy or making amends to the already existing ones. So the ACCEPT project is a framework program, Horizon 2020. It belongs to that program, and it includes 9 countries with 10 teams. And although that does not make the whole EU, but all the studies under investigation are subjected to the same analytical laws, and qualitative study it is, and it's 9 countries only, and we're surveying youth, and the 9 countries make consortium members. The project is coordinated by Tallinn University professors Mariya and Michael Gabel, also from Germany. What are we doing in this project? First of all, I want to thank Ms. Yulia for speaking about mentioning those 3 aspects: the unemployment itself, the emergence of unemployment, the duration of one's being unemployed, and our project concerns purely the implications of employment. We're not into the reasons and origins of unemployment and why and how the young people become unemployed, and we're not studying also how quickly they come out of that condition. We're studying the aspect: once one has already become unemployed, how would that influence their further life, and what policies, what interventions may potentially mitigate that condition, and eventually single out what aggravates and worsens that already negative effect to make further amends and understand. So we study based on the European market, employment market, job market data, and the risks among youth, and we're not only learn the quantitative data, we also give youth an opportunity to make their statements related to what they're faced with in real life once they become unemployed. Also, I would like to turn your attention if on completion of this session, as soon as you walk out of this room, you will see a number of photographs hanging on the walls that's by the winners of our photo contest that last year lasted 3 months in spring and early in summer, because we wanted the young people to demonstrate by means of some visual aid like media, to demonstrate how they see the complexities that are related to coming out to the job market, graduation, end of studies, they're getting adult and so on, and you will see their life stories through the photographs they're hanging up. And by the way, these photographs is the absolute #1 champion of the contest. Please hear us, I would call that. Our approach to the analysis, that's a multiple analysis, and we're studying relation or linkage on an individual level on how unemployment is related to 3 aspects of one's life. One of them is health and subjective well-being, which is evaluated by either a happiness level or satisfaction with life level. The second aspect includes autonomy, autonomy being in a broad sense of that, and that will be the autonomy of one's residence, which is that the young people may leave home and not being around, not sticking around with the parents and living their own. That's psychological. Also, autonomy, self-reliance, when the person feels they are in full control of their life and they can make their decisions. And that is also economic autonomy. And the third aspect is socio-economic aspect in the future and the risk to stay poor, to turn, to find themselves poor. That's actually some lengthy prospects and picture until you retire. So in other words, the aspect under investigation is when youth in different countries become unemployed, how exactly that narrows down their chances to get the right livelihood as soon as they retire, or is there any other help, assistance, so that their contribution they're making to cover their needs, or do they think about that? Is there or is there not? Do they have a better motivation to save up money and thinking about a high level of unemployment when they already have gotten a job, and so on and so forth? Today I'm going to mention the first aspect only. The analysis is complete, and you can see the memo with the outcomes and practical recommendations, but by the end of October, the results are expected to be already published on the 2 other aspects on our website. So the first one is relational linkage on an individual level, individual linkage on how unemployment or unstable jobs or short-term contracts-based job or incomplete part-time employment would influence one's health in the long run, or subjective livelihood, well-being. But after we studied that aspect, we switched to the second level, and we tried to see how multiple institutions on the level of state influence this kind of linkage relation. Do they mitigate that relation? Do they improve that relation? So we looked, therefore, into different aspects of state policy. And today I would like to announce as an example, like active and passive policy on the labor market, legislation about the employment and education system. There are different systems of education, and the question is whether this particular relation throughout different education systems, is it more or less negative? So results on an individual level demonstrate that one's work is very vital, important to youth, to their health and well-being. Doesn't matter if it's part-time or full-time. Most importantly, a person has a job. While not having a job would substantially worsen the well-being. It less so influences one's health, but we looked into one's health subjective evaluation. Unfortunately, we didn't have an opportunity to look into the mental versus physical health of an individual. That's very subjective, the overall health condition, as at least they were asked. So yet another study that is interesting, that unemployment also influences their partners, but that only concerns men. If a man loses a job, that would have a negative impact on their subjective livelihood and well-being and that of their partner, spouse. If a woman loses her job, that does not have a bad impact on the man. There is a long-term effect or impact of one's employment on one's health and well-being, and it's just to say that the EXCEPT team in Kiev Economy school, together with the university that partnered with us, we studied that long-term impact, and we looked into an elderly people's panel, and we had information about their experience of staying unemployed when being young, and we also found that the unemployment effect stays there even in 30, 35 years after that situation that only popped up once. And Edward Norton was present at that conference, and we know that he explored Ukraine proper by ULMS data. That's a monitoring survey, longitudinal, and we also looked at how unemployment influences and once losing a job, some exogenic reasons when companies were being closed down and many people were made redundant, not of their own accord. And we found that there is a negative influence impact on human health. And in 2003, 2004, 2007, in other words, in a certain while after that experience of once being unemployed happened. And in Ukraine, we had some unique possibilities. We also looked into one's lifestyle and different aspects influencing one's health, therefore. And what we found out that negative impact on one's health is basically through one's higher consumption of tobacco and alcohol. What is interesting is that tobacco use, regardless of one's age, if a person leads through that unemployment experience or losing one's job experience, sorry, I need to be more exact, we looked into actually losing a job, then by about 20% the probability goes up that they start smoking tobacco, and regardless one's age, but that happens. But about alcohol, that is mostly for youth. So in other words, if when young you live through unemployment experience, then your alcohol consumption goes up, and if that happens in an older age, that doesn't show. And in women, that's reduction in their physical activities. So the second level of the results concerns state policy on education and employment, and there is a context how come this, how the state can reduce that influence, and also the benefits, unemployment benefits, those the higher those pays, the better to stand through this period. And then education, lesser percent of high school graduates go into universities. That people in countries where more people have higher education, they go study at universities, and it is there where that influence is less negative. And that also concerns the improvement of one's possibility to get a second chance for further education. That was another interesting finding that reflects a quite substantial impact of that policy. I would like us to quickly voice the recommendations of Ukrainian youth that we used in our study. Anna Quid was doing that study, traveling to different regions of Ukraine, talking to young people, and what they said could be divided into three aspects. The first aspect being support to professional development, improvement of one's professional head-ups, orientation, and respondents said that there is not enough information of the value added, the added value of one's diploma, helping them find different positions, and there's a mismatch between supply and demand. There's the quotation on the labor market. When I went to university, there was like a big stand with many good words about environment, ecology, that your colleges are expected to be kings of the world. You're gonna be able to do all things. Everyone will want to grab you for a job. And then they graduate, and in fact, you do whatever you want. You're free to go. Then the next one is improvement of education quality. We have a problem with not actually with the turnout for universities applicants, but actually what they want at universities, better teachers with better experience, upgraded program, curriculum that would really train them to be the right specialists for the labor market. Advanced training. Concerning the advanced training, it was announced, it was stated that there was a need for a training on entrepreneurship or business background, and we had an issue with different support services, in particular the state unemployment service. And the comment here says, I had already known all those things. We were taught it would be much more interesting to attend a workshop where I would actually study the trade. Like the own business, and actually supporting the unemployed as they get new careers, new walks of life. And this citation says that the State Employment Service proposed me an education of a seamstress, of a tailor woman, but I had already had that education. If you already have, we won't help you. We only have that offer only, but she had actually wanted to be an accountant to get settled in on a job. Another aspect is microfinancing, which is financial support to micro entrepreneurship, to youth. The youngsters did not make that statement themselves, but that's rather a recommendation of the researcher based on all the interviews, because many of them dreamt about opening up some small businesses, and that support would be very important. And number three is communication as to state-run programs, which is making one more aware about supports available, because people sometimes, especially younger people, don't know sometimes what programs are there to help them with money, searching for a job, trainings. And what else is important is Ukrainian stereotypes about state-provided services. Here, what he says, it's been like 2.5 months since I was unemployed. Never thought about that, never, because I'd never thought they would propose anything good to me. That's a state institution, and negative things go together with those institutions, like bureaucracy, like its difficult service. I, for example, wasn't there, and my impression was nobody is going to help me from a side. I have to find it myself, find something, think of ways. And I would like to end my brief presentation with this, and I would like to hand it over to you, Leah, because you want to basically hear from you some comments as to those conclusions.
Let's first give the floor to Mariya for her to add, because she has got some additional ideas on the topic, and then we'll move over to the discussion. Thank you. So good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to all the participants of this panel discussion and to all those present here. And thanks a lot to Olena for such an interesting research and for such an interesting direction provided to our discussion. At the beginning of the discussion, we we outlined these directions in which we could reduce the negative impact and the negative consequences. And in my discussion, I would like to talk more about the first direction in terms of how to prevent unemployment among young people. And I'm going to repeat a couple of your ideas, I guess, and then I will add up some ideas of mine, which have not yet been mentioned here. So, first of all, let's touch upon the issue of preventing unemployment. About 2 years ago, I wrote an article on Vox Ukraine, and in this article, I told that at the moment, educational curricula in Ukraine are absolutely outdated, and it's not a secret for anyone. The curricula are not adjusted to modern needs, the needs of the modern market. And if, in case they are revised quite often by people who also quite distant from the realia and the needs of the modern market. I would advise that it is necessary to involve companies, private companies, corporations in developing new curricula. Together with, I stumbled across the Russian word, sorry. So together with the educational institutions, since it is necessary to have some trainings, to have not just nominal but real trainings, which would involve students, even freshmen, even school children. And we should develop some job fairs, meetings with young people. And these all things would be necessary not just for graduates and students of the last years of their studies, but for freshmen and school children, for them to know about the market needs. And I was extremely happy when yesterday I came to know from Yarema that, in fact, in Ukraine, that all exists already. Maybe that's just the beginning, but anyway, this is all developing and rather successfully developing. And these ideas are not just ideas, just individual, local measures taken, but these are the ideas laid down in the state program. And we have more than 100 companies which are holding those kind of campaigns, those kinds of programs, and who promise job creation thanks to such trainings and probations. And the programs, the curricula developed together with the companies and with the state. And I'm sure that Yarema will talk more on that. However, I would state that this is really the direction which is necessary, which is absolutely required for the future. This is my first statement. The second statement is about the results of surveys of companies held by the World Bank, conducted in Ukraine in 2000. Well, it seems to me there were 2 or 3 surveys, and the latest was in 2015, if I'm not mistaken. So there was a survey of companies and a lot of questions covered, and one of the issues covered was what are the obstacles you see on the way to the labor market? And the ones mentioned, like institutions, legislative base, tax base, also included, with 1 out of 5 respondents, the lack of technical qualified staff. They claim that this is one of the most important impediments for companies on the labor market. And I guess this is a very interesting finding we should focus on, and we should discuss in a more profound way. We are talking not just about qualified labor, but also about young people and about the technical specialists. We don't mean here the graduates of higher educational institutions, but we rather mean here the specialists, graduates of vocational schools and colleges. In Ukraine, at the moment, we have overproduction of so-called fashionable diplomas in the occupations like economics, law, so these are all managers and all secretaries, because there is a demand for that, but there is overproduction of these diplomas, and there is no production in the necessary amounts of technical experts. That is related primarily to the problem I've been just mentioning, which is the problem of outdated curricula of vocational schools. But this is also related to the stigmatization which exists in the society in relation to those occupations. Quite often, we have a kind of contempt for those pupils who go to vocational schools because they are thought to be incapable of getting any other education. That they're considered to be bad pupils. That's why we have to work on a two-tier level. Both we should develop more modern curricula for those vocational schools, and also we have to work with our society to prevent this stigmatization and to change the attitude of the society to those occupations, for people to understand that these occupations in the modern world are also important. They are in demand, in high demand, and we need to get respect for those specialists with technical skills. And the third statement I would like to voice here has not yet been mentioned. This is rather a new topic. You know, in the project and beyond the project, we quite often try to consider the problems of jobs and unemployment through the prism of two categories. We have work or job and unemployment, two extremities. In fact, the world of job on the whole is now changing rapidly. And quite often, it's not the case that a person is not inactive at all. I mean that still there is some activity present. There is some activity there. People are employed or unemployed, but they take turns. I mean, and that is what we may frequently note among young people. Like they have some job, then they don't have, then they have the job again. And now, thanks to modern technologies, we can see an explosion in jobs through mobile applications and through the internet platform. There has been held a research throughout the world in terms of the available platforms and the percentage of jobs of work done via those platforms. And we can see that in Ukraine there are about 20 platforms. Some of them are Ukrainian market-oriented, some of them are Russian market-oriented, but there are also some platforms which are world community or world labor market-oriented. And if we have a look at the world market-oriented platforms, we can see that Ukraine now takes place #1 in Eastern Europe in terms of the scope of financial flows and in terms of the scope of assignments and objectives which are done within those platforms in IT field. And it takes the 4th place within the whole scope of financial flows and assignments in Eastern Europe, which means that now this is a phenomenon in Ukraine which has been developed, has gained popularity, and this is a phenomenon which will keep developing. And therefore, primarily, young people are the people who work in those platforms. That is a very interesting point because we face a lot of issues as a result of that. You know, on the one hand, these internet platforms provide a lot of prospects, and they provide people with jobs. They deprive us of unemployment. They prevent unemployment. They give us a chance to open some world labor markets for us and to extend our range of opportunities. Also, they allow for the inflow of financial flows into Ukraine. But, you know, at the same time, these jobs, and this is the work which carries some risks with it, and we should be very careful about those risks. These are the risks related to the fact that these platforms can close your accounts. There are some risks of non-payment of wages, let alone wages, it could be non-payment of income. And the great risk also is that people working via those platforms represent themselves as independent employees. They don't have the employer, and hence they face the problems of taxation, tax payment, health care insurance, social benefits, pension security, and so on. This all lies on the shoulders of those employees, those independent employees, only on their shoulders, and quite often we see that they themselves cannot cope with it all. They don't take part in those programs themselves, which is a kind of a bomb, which is going to explode quite soon. And these are the things that we have to work at in the nearest future. We have to contemplate over those issues. And we face the problem that when we are considering education of our young people and adjustment of use to the modern market, the state invests a lot of money into this domain. Well, it's arguable whether it's a lot of money or not a lot of money, but still there is some investment into education, into school, vocational school education. What we would like to be the result of this investment, state investment? What should it be transformed into? And definitely we want young people to not to use their skills only on those platforms, but to work in other domains as well. Because via those platforms, they will definitely work for the world corporations, for the world market, and not for Ukraine. I don't mean that this is absolutely bad. But this is an arguable issue, and we have to find the answer to the questions whether we want it to happen or not, because these are the issues the young people are faced with. Here I will stop, and probably we could have also some statements still made during the informal discussions. Thank you, Mariya. I think that we should address the representatives of official authorities and to ask them, how do you think that can be implemented some of the recommendations Olena has mentioned, which are based on the EXAPT project researches? And, you know, Mariya has also asked an additional question as to how mobile forms of employment and the trend of involving our labor force in the modern forms of employment and in the transition to the so-called Uber economy or freelance economy. So, I mean, are our state politicians ready to meet those challenges, and are they ready to mitigate the consequences of those precarious forms of unemployment or reduction of unemployment and the influence of unemployment on the further life of young people? So I'm giving the floor to Mr. Kovtunets, I guess, because the system of education is the core in terms of answering those questions. Thank you for very interesting results of your research. But, you know, if I dealt with the problem, I would still include the reasons for unemployment into your research, because there must be some correlation behind that. The correlation between the reasons and the consequences of unemployment. And I think the research would be far more interesting then. On the other hand, we need to recognize that to a considerable extent, the unemployment and economic stagnation of our state results from our education. That's what we have to recognize. Since for 25 years, we've been telling each other and everybody in the world that our system of education is the best one, and we really have a good capacity to have a profound and good educational system, but somehow we are making this potential close to zero. I'm going to provide you with the data announced by the World Economic Forum within the Global Competitive Ability Index for us to understand how unbalanced our system is. So in terms of coverage of education by higher education, we take about 10th or 12th place. Elementary education, this is the fourth 10. Then mathematical and engineering education, we are already 14 something, and the quality of business education, that is where we are almost 100. And before us, we have a lot of Asian and African countries. Which means that with this level of education and this condition of the system, we are not going to overcome unemployment, and we, so to say, won't have any serious innovative processes because there is nobody to bring them into life. And if we have a look at higher education, well, 4 years of university education means kind of postponing the problem of unemployment for a certain period of time, but it doesn't mean settlement of the problem. And there is a great lack of balance in higher education. And this research is superficial, but I will tell you the results of research. So in one of the regions, the number of young people who are on the labor exchange is higher than the amount of state order for all those occupations in the region, which means that the money is just spent in vain. Then the result is the bad quality of education. And let's have a look at the last year's external independent testing. It has shown that every fourth graduate of with a bachelor's diploma cannot pass the test in English, which is based on secondary school programs. You have to respond to this somehow. And there is a wider problem, which is the quality of labor force. Because if we're talking about the project of new Ukrainian schools, we are trying to emphasize the combination of upbringing and education and value forming. Because investors are coming to us, they are ready to create jobs, but in a year's time or 2 years' time, they flee because of the following reasons. First of all, technological discipline is the thing which doesn't exist with us, and secondly, our workers steal a lot. Well, the third reason is that sometimes the real qualifications are what we lack, but this is still achievable. But personality and values and upbringing are the things which we lack. That's why I guess that the policy of the current government is absolutely right, because at first we need to change the system radically to improve the quality of education, to make it modern and advanced, and only then we can count on some serious economic reforms and job creation and liquidation of unemployment. And here are two components I'm going to talk about. The first one is assistance provision to young people for them to find what is cognate for them, their work, their place in this life, for them to fulfill their potential. I mean, professional guidance we don't deal with at all. As a result of that, young people after the 11th form just choose at random any occupation, and then it turns out that on getting the bachelor's diploma, the Bachelor of Philosophy, they get back to technology to get the junior specialist in some technical occupation, because only then you can get access to some job you need. That is a kind of a circle. The other reason, the other problem caused by unemployment is absence of reliable authentic information and the focus for the development of labor market. This is a very complicated problem, and many European countries are also unable to focus what is going to happen in the labor market. But at least as far as the current needs are concerned, so I guess that the situation is assessed, let's say, in the Netherlands through indirect methods, and young people can find out where they would be able to find jobs. We have state order. Yes, I know I'm responsible for this. The number of people, the number of students you need, the number of graduates you need. But it is based on just imaginary figures which do not reflect any reality. And if we don't learn to analyze the needs of the labor market in a high-quality way, we won't pass any informed decision. We will just spend the money in vain. If we take the information from the site of the State Employment Service in terms of the vacancies and applications, job applications, we could see that the situation is as follows. Per one vacancy, per one job with higher education, there are 5 to 7 special vacancies of non-higher education. And now we are working at changing the situation to make vocational schools and colleges modern, advanced, and to have a really professional system of non-higher technical education that could provide the state with jobs and with qualified labor. There are quite a lot of vacancies like this, but the person with higher education sometimes don't realize that quite often their diplomas don't provide jobs to them, and their career will end up as a merchant, a seller in the market. And finally, as far as the quality of education, of higher education is concerned, so this education is detached from the labor market, and it has been just recently that with the new law on higher education we have provided a chance to the universities to launch their own programs with no state control, and they've got the license for one occupation, for example, and this is a specialized branch of education, and you can do whatever you want in this occupation. You can work with any curricula. Only one private Ukrainian Catholic university has successfully used this opportunity and suggested the educational program which really leads people to the labor market. No additional training is necessary after they get the diploma. And there is a huge need for the training of electronic business specialists. But what is happening on our electronic platforms cannot stand the criticism from any aspect, from any respect, because that is just a naive work of people who are not qualified in the field. No specific electronic business program has been suggested, though the European University started doing this in 1999, when we only started talking about electronic business. The next field is farming. Quite recently, that issue has been considered by the government, and it has been discussed that farming cannot somehow compete with large companies, because large companies have people of different specialities. But the farmer should do everything by bits. So let's provide educational programs for farmers, for them to get acquainted with agronomy, with veterinary, with other different fields, with technology. Because, normally agrarian university comes up to us and says that provide us with agrarian economy because this is special economy. No, that's not the case. So up till recently, this separation of the content of higher education, which is rather obsolete, in particular in many engineering sciences, engineering occupations, this is the level of the 60s, and in some other fields as well. Sometimes people enter the first year of studies and they claim that they are taught by the textbooks which are dated the 60s, which are absolutely obsolete. Well, mathematics and physics still could be taught by them, but even modern English cannot be taught using those textbooks. And we have to do something about it all. The ministry and the government are ready and willing to reform the educational system in order to introduce healthy mechanisms of competition in education, for the education to really meet the needs of people. Thank you, Mr. Kovtunets. Thank you. I have to interrupt because we are pressed for time, and there must be an opportunity provided to other panelists to have their say. I'm very glad that here we have a self-critical person, the person who is really objective about the things and about the drawbacks and faults of the educational system, because objective view is already half done towards the removal of those mistakes and improvement of the system of education in terms of making it more relevant and more modern and advanced, the one helping our young people not to lose jobs or to find jobs and find the opportunities to find jobs without staying for a long time as jobless.
Now, Mr. Yarema, beyond the education system, what possibilities are there to implement the recommendations of the study, so that you, as a top official, you're gonna learn something from this panel? Maybe what recommendations, what could be implemented out of these recommendations? Good afternoon, everybody. It's extremely pleasant to be present at this interesting discussion. I will start with the education matter because I recently heard a very typical phrase, very typical of our time, that teachers that were taught yesterday are teaching the ones that will work tomorrow into the great unknown, because we're living through some transformation time, and what Volodymyr was just talking about, I'm absolutely supportive to that, because today we can see studies, other studies of other people that are a little bit into futurology, and they talk about like in a 10 to 20 years time there will be the disappearance of whole clusters of trades, and therefore communication between sectors, the state, civil society, R&D, business is important to provide more clear answers to the questions at stake today, and that concerns young people and parents. Why parents? Because we're talking about unemployment and reasons to unemployment that Mr. Volodymyr yet fails to mention. That's a stereotypical imagination of what is good and what is bad, because the stereotype is that higher education is always good, and we can see the statistics, like the numbers of people graduated from universities. There's a certain proportion of them go in to employment centers to get a job. So one of the key questions is the need to create a clear system of labor markets, and that could be only in connection between state and business. And the second important point, someone may agree or disagree with, we need a system of professional orientation, a vocational orientation system, and together with international institutions, we're making the first step, and we have developed a universal proficiency orientation test adapted to the Ukrainian realities that Ukrainian youth may take, and that's free of charge, and that's for high school students. There's a number of specialists that may provide recommendations to parents on where to look at, where to look to in one's choice of a new profession, of a new trade. And we can see a few 100,000 young Ukrainians have taken advantage of that. I can't yet say the ultimate conclusion on how it was, but at least that's the first step of that pathway. And then back to intersectoral cooperation. Last year, our ministry, together with the Center of Corporate and Social Responsibility with a number of business institutions, initiated the signing of a pact for Ukrainian youth. What was the idea of this project? When entrepreneurship or business within its own development of corporate and social responsibility, that idea came up on the level of the EU like 1.5 years ago, and that was to turn attention to the young people, a special group, I think, very vulnerable group. They're making their first steps, and again, young people try to sort it out in what direction to go, make their steps. A number of parameters were made to be met within that pact. Number one is creating jobs for young people, then development of new on-the-job training programs, and development of partnership between business and universities. Not only universities, it is more about professional vocational schools and so on. Very briefly about the results. The pact lasts up until 2020, and it includes a number of tasks. 1 year ago, it was signed. One of the tasks objectives had 10,000 new jobs to be created, maybe a minor figure for all Ukraine, but at least such a step was made. 100 partnerships were concluded between business and universities. It's been 1 year, and we have 11.5 thousand jobs and 270 partnerships. Those partnerships provide the adaptation of business curricula, and business also needs to understand who might need it. My first background is engineering. And when I studied geodesic surveillance, and we used the theodolites made back in 1953, and there was a businessman coming over, and that was already the space technology he displayed, so everyone was amazed, everyone was shook up, and then it was said, you forget what you had before, and now try sorting out and being up on what really exists on the labor market. And as we see this project is developing, evolving pretty dynamically, and as of today, it's already been 58 companies included, because there were different ones out of them, like Metro, Coca-Cola, D-Tech, Ukr Telecom, that start thinking more about what particular way to help young people find themselves on the labor market. And we can see new experiences of on-the-job training program. We went to not only developing those things on a national level, but also on the regional level. So next Tuesday, Odessa will host the third forum with business people, with HRs, with companies, with just young people. So they will discuss what expectations to have of business, of young people, skills necessary, competences needed. And one point that shall not be forgotten, that 20 or 30 years ago you might have gotten a higher education, and then once or twice in your life you will go through some advanced training and you'll be a more successful thing on the labor market. So now further education is a more substantial and urgent need, because last week the parliament passed a law on informal education that was acknowledged to be an important step for younger people to develop themselves and find their place in life. So there's such forums as platforms gathering business representatives and young people allow also one on the level of studying. We say that the target group is high school students and junior university students to help them better orient themselves, get heads up, and develop. And it's been like many years, not actually many years, but the 26 years since we parted ways with the Soviet paternalist model, when the state already makes a decision and knows how to better develop for a citizen, what kind of education to get, and where to work and what particular position. But we should not forget the responsibility of young people and each individual citizen. And that's about how exactly to be a success. And we're talking about this. It's achievable via informal education tools. There is an interesting curriculum or program of youth education, informal education, and that works in the sector of youth policy, in the civil sector, and in the cultural sector, by studying, by learning knowledge and skills and how to deal with young people, to be on the same page with them and help them find themselves. Because in this particular case, we're not talking about unemployment only, but we're talking about employment too, that young people needs to be employed, engaged. That could be civil activities, that could be volunteers activities, that could be exchanging or sharing ideas and changing one's environment. Because some short time ago, I communicated with young specialists into urbanistics, beautification, and that could be parks and canals in the city in one or another area. And you just spoke about changing the times a little bit, changing on the times a little bit, and new shapes and forms coming up that we never had before. And therefore, the job of the state is to maintain the active dialogue between the sectors, business and society, to be ready to respond to the challenges. And now I would like to urge my R&D colleagues to develop a national employment action plan for youth that is supposed to reflect all the parts, all the parties, all the angles of partnership, and how to facilitate in a maximum way so that the young person clearly understands what expects them at the labor market and also how to be successful in that market. Thank you very much. Mr. Yarema was very happy to hear that there are state programs taking care of youth unemployment and trying to avoid that phenomenon. But once you found yourself in that position, a second chance needs to be given. That's very important, and it's actually very important to know such programs exist because I'm sure that far not all the floor here, especially those within the R&D think, know about the existence of those programs. I would like to invite Ihor Samokhin to be part of the discussion because you already know the study results, and I'm sure you have something to say on that account as you explored into that issue once. And what other additional recommendations can you provide to the authorities present here, or how could you also replenish, how could you supplement what was already said? I'm working in the education division for my analytical center, and I agree with Mr. Volodymyr about the quality of higher education in Ukraine, though it all shows that despite the poor quality of higher education, the level of people with higher education, it was a good quality, but the level of education is the people with education have a higher unemployment than many other people, but anyway, they provide socialization, communication for students, so they do something useful. But another issue is, shall the state pay universities for their socialization, and they therefore should provide good skills, good knowledge. But another big problem is that many young people are not ready to join universities, higher education establishments. They are not ready for serious studies because of the poor level of secondary education in Ukraine, high school education in Ukraine. Up to a quarter of high school graduates cannot pass math and score 10 points. So they only achieve 10 points out of 60, and that's pretty poor knowledge, and that's important because it is known from social academic studies that secondary education at the age of about 16 years old is very important to train a person to create one's background knowledge. It's more important at that age rather than the higher education proper, when the person has already taken shape in their 20s. So I would like to pay attention to secondary education, to high school education, and that's more problematic in rural areas, as rural school graduates provide worse progress, lower progress compared to the city ones, urban ones, because their parents in the village, they have lower incomes, less cultural development opportunities in a village, in a rural area. But there are possibilities to deal with some problems of the above, and resolve them. Another problem is that in villages there are many schools with not enough teachers, lacking enough teachers, and teachers sometimes might take two classes instead of one, and two subjects instead of one, or three subjects, and there is already changes going on, which is smaller schools are closing down. And it's better to have, therefore, one school for all the community in such a format, with high school classes, with better concentration on teachers, with better quality of training before the to prepare them for joining universities, so that eventually we don't have empty classrooms with no children and with not enough teachers. That concerns rural areas. Concerning big cities, we see another problem. They don't talk a lot in Ukraine, and that certification of the education system that's included in the recommendations with the accept study. What is meant is that in big cities there is a big gap between good schools, we call gymnasia, lyceum, and regular schools that are very bad, very poor, and that's not because of them called gymnasia or lyceum. That's because they pick up the best teachers, and we first see that was a gap that is pretty huge, but it was created, we may say, artificially, like the best regular school students just transfer to a gymnasia, and that creates segregation, no equal possibilities, and the worst progress students will be concentrated in worse schools and or as opposed to lyceum, and that will be a lack of synergy. Therefore, when higher progress students will drag up and fetch up the lower grade students, lower progress students, as the world experience showed that contributes to a higher level of secondary education, and there are there are such systems of education. Such a gap really prevents the people, young people, from having right access to labor market. Thank you, Mr. Ihor. I unfortunately have to complete the session because we have exhausted our time. We have even exhausted the time that was dedicated to Mr. Serhiy Kravchenko. So thank you, Mr. Kravchenko, for not arriving here at the forum. And on the other hand, I apologize that he wasn't able to get around here, but hopefully Employment Service are still here, some other guys, and hopefully the conclusions and proposals will be voiced, and because they are really indispensable to improve the service provided by the employment administration, has to play a role. And the last remark, Mr. Yarema wanted a word, and I apologize for taking more time, for being late, but I think we can put the coffee break to a good use, and please, the keynote speakers are available in person at the coffee break. 1 minute. One of the recommendations concerned development of entrepreneurship initiatives. As one area of our job is the development of youth centers, where beyond the school curricula, young people might be able to self-attenuate. And since the new year, we will start like a pilot program or programs of successful local businesses for entrepreneurs, for young people that take an interest in entrepreneurship, for them to develop in this direction. And we have the first results in a number of regions, where as the result of that kind of mingling together, a new business is set up, and young people thus create jobs for themselves and other younger people. Thank you for this exhortation work with youth. It has a place to be, so that young people make the right choice of their trade for the rest of their life. Thank you, panel participants. Thank you for being so attentive, careful, and hopefully the results of this discussion will be useful to you in back at work. And please be open to the people.